And go. We are live on YouTube.
Lovely. Hello and welcome. I'm not even going to say what episode of Foreign and Domestic because I've been off it that long, but I guess this is a special report. Foreign and
Breaking
Domestic.
news.
Well, we'll be getting a lot of that. I'm Patter Cleary, back on the pod.
Hey,
Obviously, been chatting with Ramon about the developments that's happening here. I've been a busy man, father again. What? Um,
congratulations.
Thank you. But yeah, obviously, this developments that's happening in the Ukraine right now is significant. We're looking at a war, in Europe, not seen since obviously World War II. Um, but everything else around that that's happening is you got massive posturing by superpowers as well as the NATO alliance. Just a lot of stuff going on, and me and Ramon were chatting there a minute ago. It's very fluid. The Ukrainian President Zelensky tonight said that pretty much tonight in Kiev is going to be make or break for them. But yeah, very anxious times. I guess a lot of people, are looking at what's going on right now and wondering, what's next. I know certainly for me, I didn't think that. I knew Putin was a bit of a bully. I knew that he liked to test the boundaries. Obviously, we saw that in Crimea in 2014. But I didn't think he was going to go a full scale assault. It was
No.
really surprising to me.
Yeah,
But
1000%.
yeah,
I didn't think I was literally so just to give you because I don't even think I told you this and tell the audience. I was doing research for a Russia episode for like 2 weeks, and then I was gonna just do one of my solos where I just do like a
yep,
quick little semi-scripted deep dive into a historical topic because I wanted to give the historical context of like what led us
sure,
to this point. And that was like 3 weeks ago. And when I started the research, and then like 7-8 days ago, this shit really started heating up to the point where it was like, oh well, like half of what I was going to talk about is irrelevant now because
right,
you know what I mean. And then it shifted into you know uh the whole discourse being just like a hot take fucking dead man zone, like no man's land. It's just people
yeah,
just getting
yeah,
smoked any take they had because
yep,
shit was changing every day. So I was like, all right, there's no point trying to do like a solo fucking. Yeah, I
yep,
just was like, yeah, I'm not gonna do it. And then you're like, oh, let's do one. So I'm like, fucking perfect because
yeah,
this is definitely something where we got to have our own mini discourse around this because there's still a bunch of stuff I'm trying to like work out as far as like what you mentioned before. And we'll get into like a little background, just a
hmm,
light touch of what led us here, and not necessarily like reaching back to the creation of Ukraine like 91, but like the last few years.
yeah,
But I completely didn't either, dude, and I'm kind of glad I didn't make through that episode because after I was gonna go through like some of the historical context, I was gonna give my take because like for like over like the last month and a half, United States like the State Department was basically saying like, "Oh, Russia's going to invade." And you know
yeah,
me, I'm super skeptical about fucking
hmm,
anything the American intelligence apparatus has to say.
right,
I need evidence, and it's like, holy shit, they were fucking right for once.
yeah. And I've heard that been discussed about how like everything that Biden and Blinken have been saying is over the last week or so is coming to fruition. Well, I mean that's not necessarily something to be lauded. I mean, obviously, they were kind of calling the shot at Russia, which I guess um, showed the hand of Vladimir Putin. But he's the type of person that doesn't really care.
Right.
It was kind of surreal. Was it Wednesday night when everything started? There was a UN meeting chaired by the Russian again, and everyone had remarks prepared. Right? Obviously, they were saying like, "Putin, don't do this. Putin, don't do this." And before the meeting started, uh, they started the special assault or whatever they were calling it, special mission. So it came to the Ukrainian delegate, and he basically said, "I've had remarks prepared here, but what's the point?" And it was just a very surreal moment,
Right.
real grim, and that at this point, I think you're seeing a lot of sanctions coming through, and a lot of talk around the sanctions is that they will take time to kind of cripple the things that Putin wants to do economically and whatnot. But I think an interesting tandem with this is that you're seeing some support from China. Honestly, obviously Iran have,
I would say, more than some.
Yeah, and we know how significant they are as players economically as well as militarily. So that's interesting, and I think I mentioned to you right before we hopped on, there was a Security Council meeting tonight,
Mhm.
and
Yeah, I'm looking at all the quotes from it right now.
Right, excellent. So from what I heard, I haven't read, but I heard that obviously they were kind of chastising Russia, and they wanted to reprimand them on that, and it was vetoed by Russia. But I think what they were really looking at was whether India and China, how they were going to be at the meeting. I don't know if you saw that. No.
Yeah, so I'm looking at right now. I'm seeing India's UN, and this is from the New York Times. India's UN ambassador T.S. Tirumurti justified his country's abstention from a vote condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine by saying, quote, "Diplomacy was given up. Dialogue is the only way to end hostilities," he said. "It is a matter of regret that the diplomacy was given up, and for these reasons, India has chosen to abstain from this resolution." So this is where, like, we can, if you want to do it now or do like some of the analysis around, because all we have right now is, guys, there's like a breaking news every like 30 fucking minutes about a different area of Ukraine being being shelled, firefights happening, anti-aircrafts, systems shooting at shit. Like it's all over the place. And a lot of that, the sclerotic nature of that reporting is mostly due to no one in the West really has sources in Russia, first of all. So that's a big part of it. There is no heads up of anything that's happening, and that's sort of what's allowed Putin to do this. But as far as the analysis of like different UN member states and their commentary, India abstaining, the United Arab Emirates abstaining from this, and China abstaining from this is tacit approval.
Yeah.
And there's no other way to frame that. And I think that that's huge. And I know that probably everyone on CNN and MSNBC is having that same analysis right now because it's so obvious. Like this isn't any special insight.
Yeah.
If someone goes on an aggressive invasion of another country, regardless of how they consider their sovereignty, whether it's real or not,
yeah,
for India, who's sort of played the middle for a long time between the West and the East, China, who's an enemy of the West, and the UAE is the real shocker here. That's probably more significant than even China is as far as like geopolitical gamesmanship, because I feel like everyone forgot, like so there was some stuff that came out on Mohammed bin Salman making sort of sounds like he didn't really give a shit what was happening yesterday. And now it's like super obvious, but I feel like everyone forgets, like, Obama stiff-armed the shit out of him for a long time in the last year of his presidency, and then he killed Khashoggi and nothing happened. So he's sort of just like in the wind, and he's a crazy motherfucker himself. So people should be super concerned because, like, we're talking about all these sanctions packages and, are we going to cut them off from SWIFT, all this other stuff. And, we can get into that a little later too. But if you have China looking like they're going to give them like ostensible support, which it certainly seems like, because Xi's been cozying up with Putin for quite some time now. And you have the most critical thing that happened between America and the United Arab Emirates this year was Biden's been asking them to increase oil production to try to offset the cost of oil, and they're still refusing to. So that's also a huge part of this economic chess board that's happening right now, that's sort of forcing the hand of countries like Germany and France, who are at the mercy of Russia supplying 30% of their fossil fuels. And then you have the UAE being like, well, I'm just going to keep these prices high, and I'm not going to say shit. So there's so much analysis to be done here. I don't want to like bite too deep in it.
And that's the thing, is like, you look at strategically, Ukraine as a country strategically and how it plays into, Vladimir Putin's larger goals. We talk about like northern Ukraine and that pocket of between Kiev and the Belarusian border.
Mhm.
We talk about right down that the Dnipro River there. That's the majority of economically where Ukraine will get its strength from. But you have the Donbass, you have Crimea and the Black Sea there. That's all areas that Vladimir Putin sees as strength economically, as well as just as a nationalistic thing to bring Ukraine back. I think that's part of it, but I think the biggest thing for me is and after kind of analyzing Putin, time and time again, I think this is a big ego thing for him. I listened to his interviews he did with Oliver Stone. I don't know if you've seen them. A couple of years ago, he did like four interviews. It was a series with Showtime, and he talked at length about obviously the legacy that Russia has in the world. He's an educated guy. He
Yeah,
obviously knows.
he's wicked smart. Like
Yeah.
him and Xi are probably the two like most intelligent world leaders, besides like I would say Merkel, but she's gone now.
Yeah. And he gives a good analysis on how things really played out in the 20th and 21st century, and how Russia played a part in that. But he saw, since the fall of the USSR, Boris Yeltsin coming in, and he was a bit of a buffoon. And then there's also talk of him creating false flags. Remember the bomb that gave them the opportunity then to go into places like Chechnya.
Mm-hmm.
Just listening to those conversations he had with Stone, in the back of my mind is, this assault in Ukraine is him trying to, leave a legacy of him being the ultimate strongman who got stuff back for Russia. But ultimately, I think this may be bad for Russia. I mean, maybe bad. It will be bad for Russia.
Yeah,
because I think he's not getting the support from his own people on this. And I think if ideal scenario, I think what's going to happen is there'll be some sort of mutiny within Russia. Tough to see, but that would be an ideal scenario for me, I think.
Right. So oh man, like there's so many different places we could go. Like there's all the you bringing up Chechnya, and then we could go into Georgia, Crimea. Like there's so much, and I feel it feels almost wrong to not do that, but it's impossible to do that all on one stream, and we have to sort of stick around what's happening in the now. But
yeah, I guess we could start jump off point. We could start at 2008. What was it?
I mean, I would just start real briefly, like at 91, Ukraine's formation. You know what I mean? Like, there's because that sort of is the crux of all of this. You know what I mean?
When did they give up? Didn't Ukraine give up the old nuclear weapons?
No, I'm saying them ratifying their constitution and becoming a sovereign state. On the world stage, it is accepted by the UN in 91.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
But I think one of the things that's certainly a good jump off point. But at this point now, I think a glaring thing and kind of emboldened Vladimir Putin was that Ukraine kind of played ball with the Russians and kind of gave up the nuclear arsenal that was left over from the former USSR, which now kind of puts Ukraine in an awkward, well, more than an awkward spot. And kind
folks,
of really,
you never give up the nukes. I don't fucking stand. Who are these people? Who are these people? You never give up the nukes, dog. That's the stupidest shit you could ever do. You don't even need a standing army if you have nukes. Look at North Korea. Look at them. They're chilling. They're chilling.
I wonder what he's thinking about all this.
He's probably laughing his fucking ass off right now.
Yeah.
He hasn't been in the news for over a year, like 2 years. He's probably like, oh, this is great. This is guaranteeing he won't even be fucked with at all for at least another year.
Yeah, I mean, it's I mentioned it on my face. I posted a meme about how we went from plague to World War III relatively quickly, but just the timing of this when we talk about things like energy and gas prices and the economics around all this, I think he's using an opportune time to do something like this, and using the pretext of the Donbass and the Russian citizens there now in these newly liberated places feeling threatened.
Mhm.
His timing, I'd have to say, and is kind of good for this because you're going into places that are in a weakened state anyway economically, which allows him then to kind of wield a bit more power with something like this. I guess we can look at it let's start at the point where what do we think his chances are of actually. He said he doesn't want to occupy Ukraine, but I mean, who's to believe anything he says? He just wants a change of regime in there.
Right.
Do you believe that?
I mean, again, it's so hard to like. I just real quick want to mention, like, on top of all the other, hot wars that Russia has been involved in the last 20
Sure.
years. Let's not forget the
Proxy war.
the 2014 coup in Ukraine that America did. Like there is so much rich foreign policy historical context just in this small slice of the world that we could do a whole series of podcasts on.
Mhm.
But as far as like what you're thinking, I don't know, like it's hard to answer, right? Because you're saying like,
Mhm.
what do you think he's going to do? I feel like so first of all, like the reason that I had the take, if I had recorded that episode, the take I would have had, and I'll be honest here, like I would have been wrong as fuck.
Mhm.
I would have been like, no, Putin's not going to do that, because I've always viewed him and analyzed him as like a pretty rational actor. Like, as much as people dunk on how the Russian economy's been during the course of his tenure and all, like, on a realistic level, Russia's come out pretty good coming into this decade. Like,
Yeah.
from the cards they were dealt, after the dissolution of the USSR,
Mhm.
the formation of Ukraine, just constant chipping away at their economic infrastructure, like, by the West. Like, let's not get it twisted. And again,
Yep.
this isn't me, folks. Like, I'm just gonna say this now. Don't take me like giving any type of what seems like positive analysis on like, oh, well, Putin did a good job here or Russia did this, blah blah blah. This isn't me saying like, oh, he's like definitionally good or he should be invading. No, this is me like trying to give a realistic analysis of the things that I've seen happen and what I've read
Mhm.
and what I know. But no, like I don't. Is he gonna occupy? I mean, you can't. It's like, dude,
Yeah.
look at Afghanistan. They did it. We did it. That's a tiny slice of nothing compared to Ukraine, landmass
Mhm.
wise. Not to
Yeah.
mention the how much of the population is armed and how much hatred there is between like, you can't fucking occupy that country. You're gonna
Right.
be that would be the worst fucking, like, there's so much tundra in eastern Ukraine, like the terrain, how many people you fucking the president of Ukraine was literally just telling people like a few hours ago, like, go make Molotov
Yeah,
cocktails.
they were, like,
Like,
telling them how to.
yeah, like he's
Yeah.
telling the civilians like, strap up. Like,
Right.
dude, you can't occupy fucking Ukraine. That's insanity. So, but then again, it's like, uh, you also have to consider Putin only sent about 30,000 troops in so far. He still
Yeah.
got about 120K on the border and in Belarus. So,
Right.
I mean, who knows what the fucking, and not to mention all of their naval power in the Black Sea that hasn't really let off yet. Like,
And y
there's a lot of Russian military capacity here that, again, I feel like American coverage, at least that I've seen, is sort of, they're at the same time trying to be like, oh, Putin's this giant steel monster that can just crush Ukraine in one swipe. But then there's also analysis that's like, oh, look how ineffective they've been, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, they've barely sent anything in. Like,
right. And,
Russian
what
military power is significant, and they're acting
it
like
is.
he couldn't do that if he wanted to.
And one thing we know about Russia in all the wars and conflicts that they're in, they don't mind taking losses. One of the reports, I follow a guy on Twitter. He's a good source. He's a Ukrainian guy inside, and I think today alone he was saying there was 2,000 Russian casualties from today. There's some
Yeah.
pretty intense fighting going on in these pockets of places, and obviously you're looking at Kiev tonight. Lots of people, they're coming down from the Belarusian border.
Mhm.
And like I said, one of the things that won't deter Russia, or at least Putin, and we've seen it before in Russian history, is losses. you know.
Right.
And like you just spoke about, they have guys lined up at the border, you know, over 100,000, as well as, you know, pretty heavy duty equipment to bring into these places. They're softening up these areas. You have people, you know, in the subways, taking shelter. But yeah,
I mean,
you know,
I think he might be trying to draw the Ukrainian military out for like a decisive conflict. I honestly think that that's because it does, and nothing else makes any sense, like
no, it doesn't.
strategically,
No.
because what people have to remember is like, sure, Russia's gonna come out. Russia is definitionally, if they don't end up having like a decisive battles, and it just continues to be these like little pockets of, you know, firefights and shelling back and forth and shit like that. Russia or Putin has been pretty constrained in that regard because there's civilians everywhere. That's the main reason. Like if they had an actual, if what it seems like he's trying to do, which is establish those separatist areas as new staging ground to creep the border down,
Yeah.
to sort of force Russia, Ukraine, or UN forces, if they end up coming in, to have that fight there where they can actually unleash shit. I mean, bro, the fucking the Russian, like, I think the equivalent of like their secretary general was talking about mini nukes like a month ago.
Jesus Christ.
Like tactical nukes. Like
Cute little mini nukes.
yeah. So all the whole point, the point I'm trying to make here is like Russia is, if this continues, like this nature of the fighting that is happening, yeah, Russia's going to come out of this with way more losses because it's like it's if it's like Vietnam, but if the Vietnamese had equal technological power.
Right.
You can't, you're not going to roll in someone else's fucking country where they know the lay of the land. There's civilians everywhere, and if Russians aren't going to just slaughter everyone, yeah, you're going to lose more people because you see the videos, like grandmas with like Kalashnikovs and shit.
Yeah, and
like ARs.
One of the dynamics is a lot of it is where they're trying to take over is urban warfare, which, you know, a lot of these you know, like tanks aren't really that good in urban warfare. You know what I mean?
Well, not unless you're decimating. I mean, which they're not.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things as well is that, you know, I know that, you know, they around this is they don't want Ukraine granted NATO membership. Right. I saw that Russian Foreign Ministry were saying that Finland, Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs said there would be serious military and political repercussions if Finland were to be granted NATO membership.
Yeah,
we need to call their bluff on that. Give fucking Finland NATO membership. Give Sweden NATO membership.
Well, and it's crazy because they didn't even want it. They've been like neutral arbiters since World War I. They haven't been involved in really anything.
Well, Russia tried to fuck with Finland before, but that terrain they'll never get through there.
No, but I'm saying, as far as military pacts that have been formed since World War I, Finland hasn't wanted any part of that because they were super smart and saw the writing on the wall. Like, well, we border them, so no.
Yeah.
And now Putin's kind of forcing their hand where it's like you're saying shit like that.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, what the fuck else are they going to do? Because again, these are non-nuclear weaponized countries, tiny standing armies, like all of these countries that, you know, are to the east of, like, say, Germany, don't really have any chance if Putin unleashed the full power of his military. Because again, I feel like people are forgetting there's a super chilling effect happening right now. Because not only when we mentioned, say, for example, China's you know, tacit approval, India's kind of playing it weird right now. I feel like everyone's, and I haven't heard anyone make this do this assessment. There's a fucking wild card in NATO right now. His name is Erdogan. Don't people forget, Iran is right there. There's a lot of fucking players in this theater that have been working with Russia and China that have just like, so there's been a ton of analysis around, you know, why the Germans didn't necessarily want to, you know, cancel Nord Stream 2. You know, they have their own economic dependency on Russia, like many of the NATO countries do.
But they did cancel Nord Stream 2, though, did they? Or did they just?
Well, I mean, it's paused, but like they're not like taking it apart or anything. Right. You know what I mean? And also don't forget, like I was going to bring up, there's a ton of Russian oil going through Turk Stream as well, and Nord Stream 1. It's just a matter of I think there's like 2 years left until Nord Stream 1, wherever the reservoir for where that oil is being sourced from, or
Yeah.
rather natural gas is being sourced from, is gonna be tapped. That was the whole reason for the acceleration of Nord Stream 2. But
Mhm.
like those considerations are real for those folks at home, because we're talking about countries that just don't have those resources at all. And we all
Mhm.
know what happens when countries get their backs put against walls for, like, keeping their houses warm or like feeding their people.
Yeah.
You have to make crazy ass decisions. And I mean, that is like the fact that Germany and France were like, oh, well, let's just keep talking to Putin after he had fucking declared Luhansk and what's the other region as independent, uh
Uh,
sovereignly
yeah,
recognized
Donetsk.
regions in Ukraine,
Yeah.
Donetsk. Yeah, like
Yeah.
that right there proves it. Like he had them by the balls. Like, so, and this is the other part I wanted to get to, some of the discourse where you get a lot of this jingoistic stuff come up where people are like, oh, if you say anything acknowledging strategy that Putin might have done that was effective, you're a traitor. You're this. Like Putin was Trump the other day was calling like, hey, Putin kind of did a genius move. I agree with that. Like
Mhm.
everyone dunked on Trump like, oh, you're a traitor. It's like, I mean, he's an idiot, but he's analyzing it
He's not
correctly.
wrong.
Like,
Yeah.
he's not wrong. This was, if there was ever a time for him to do this shit, I mean, like I was just listening to a bunch of breakdowns of or
Real
just
quick,
yeah,
just to make a
yeah,
point
go
on what you said there. I
ahead.
I think it's a smart move, but only a smart move for what Putin wants to do. I don't think, and this is only my analysis, I don't think this is going to end well for him
No.
and Russia. In his mind, and we can certainly do the analysis on it of what could happen. But I just personally, I think he shot his shot for sure, and timing wise for what he wanted to do, it could be the right thing, but I think it'll end poorly for him and for Russia because things are going to continue to mount, and I
Mhm.
just think the defining factor will be his own Russian people. It's not going to be
Yeah,
anything that NATO
probably.
does or anything like that. I think they'll, you're already seeing it, sports, with South Africa, to talk about apartheid. Some of the things that really pushed South Africa out of apartheid was you know kicking them out of sports. What that did was force their hand of the people of South Africa to say, what the fuck, we want to be involved, we want to live, do all that. So I think the more that we can do that and separate them from the rest of the world, because at the end of the day, there's Russian athletes, entertainers, there's Russian people are involved in the world outside of Russia.
Mhm.
um, and to ostracize and take all them out of it by what Putin is doing right now, I think that's going to force them to act for themselves and push back against that. You're already seeing the demonstrations on the streets. But sorry to cut you off there, but I just wanted
No,
to
no,
make
no.
that point.
No, I mean, that is a good point of a good sticking point for some analysis though, because it is like I see it two ways, right? And I think that this is the way Putin looks at it. Now, this is me speculating, but
Sure.
I think from his actions, this is what it seems like. So, for example, those American sanctions that Biden just put in place, um, what it does is it effectively freezes a ton of Russian assets of oligarchs, a ton of their top businesses. It even froze. So, for example, there are 4,000 registered Russian companies in Germany. A lot of them got, most of the huge bulk of them got their assets frozen too, right? So you would think that,
Yeah.
now we all saw that the video footage of, like, there's protests, a lot of young people in the streets in Russia. And I agree with the analysis, like super brave, because people just be getting disappeared, poisoned,
Hmm.
fucking like thrown off,
Gulag.
like, yeah, wild shit happening in Russia. You even say Putin's name sideways out your mouth. But
Hmm.
um I don't think Putin really takes them into account, those the Russian nationals who are abroad. I really don't think he's that concerned about that. And the reason I say that is, um, China has proven time and time again that sanctions do nothing to them.
Yeah.
They have an effective enough stranglehold on the global economic system where so much of it flows through them and relies on them, that they're completely insulated because they can never be sanctioned heavily enough to any degree to need to capitulate to anything the West wants. Now, Russia has China as an ally now, it seems, in this regard,
Hmm.
where China has its own I don't want to call it its own central bank because it's not, because the US dollar is the dominant currency on the world stage where the most damage can be done. But I mean, Russia has somewhat insulated itself across the last couple of years of the way that it's manipulated its own economy. The ruble's doing terrible right now. I think their stock market got cut in half in like the matter of like fucking 20 hours or something like that.
Yeah.
But the last piece of analysis I want to make is where, like, to roll back to what we were saying before, like, will he occupy? I don't think that that's what his goal is. I think he's pretty much going for another Crimea, where it's like, I'm going to do shock and awe. I am going to press this shit so hard, hopefully capture Zelensky and whoever else in Ukrainian leadership, force them to resign, establish some sort of puppet state, or at least or at the very least, just get Zelensky out of there enough to cause turmoil in Ukrainian democracy, and then hold on to the regions he just carved out. And then, because the thing is, at the end of the day, like we said, like, they have nukes. NATO is not going to get in a hot war with this guy over those regions. They're just not. He could take over like almost all of Ukraine, and unless he's like throwing babies off roofs, like the Russian military is doing that, NATO is not walking in there. I swear, I'm sorry, they're not, because at the end of the day, you can't, like, I feel like everyone's forgetting like the concept of mutually assured destruction. Like, I honestly don't think, and you can sort of tell it with the way Biden speaks when he talks about this stuff. Like, Saki's been getting asked nonstop, like, "Oh, are we going to send troops? Are we going to send troops?" And it's like, you people are fucking dum-dums. You can't, we can't go kill Russian soldiers. We both have nukes. That's not how the world works anymore. It's just, and Putin realizes this, and he's capitalizing on it, and he understands that, no, they're not going to fucking do anything. They're going to let me take back some of my USSR property that I deem mine, and there's nothing they can do about it. The only thing the US is going to do about it is sanctions. That's it.
It's fair to assume that, you know, Russia knew that these sanctions were going to come from this, so they kind of probably did what was necessary. I mean, I'd fathom a guess that Vladimir Putin is the best at probably hiding his wealth in history. Some would say he's the richest man in the world with what he's after instilling with oligarchs and whatnot, giving them power in order to get money. So I'm sure that he had, you know, things in place already that made him kind of sanction proof. It'll, you know, when it comes to kind of embargoing his own people a little bit, I think that's where it's gonna really affect. But I don't know
if he can keep the bulk of these sanctions from actually being felt by his people in Russia, that pressure is not going to be enough for internally to stop him. That's my point. In the short term, I'm not saying, like, in long term he's fucked, because either your own people are going to fucking or the oligarchs themselves, who are also sanctioned, are going to start doing some Valkyrie type shit like Hitler, and like they're gonna fucking plan to just take you out because they're losing all their money.
I've heard that analysis actually.
1,000%. Because because there's no long game here. It's either that happens, or you try to do Afghanistan times 1,000 and occupy Ukraine, which who eventually even your own soldiers are going to be like, what the fuck are we doing? Remember how long it took for American soldiers to actually, like, if you ask the majority of people who served during the war on terror now how they feel about it, almost all of them like, I'm not saying that they aren't like, hey, you know, I fought for my country, whatever, like, I'm proud, whatever, this and that. But as far as the specific wars and theaters they served in, every person I've talked to and every person I've seen talk about it has a terrible taste in their mouth. And that taste is going to come super quick about this, because what are you even doing? Like, what are you even doing? There isn't even any evidence. There isn't really anything that Russia or Putin can point to be like, this is why you need to go, you know, protect your Russian speaking ethnic brothers in Ukraine. Like, what? What is it? It's just a separatist.
I feel like they don't care, though. He doesn't care what the excuse is now at this point. He's doing what he does, being a bully, and it's for the Ukrainian people, which I know now there's been a conscription where every man, was it 18 to 60, has to stay behind. So they were actually stopping people and getting them out of cars and telling them they have to go, you know, defend the country.
Really? Ukraine did?
Yeah, yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that. Holy
Yeah.
shit, dude.
So, and they are giving out
Wow.
guns to every citizen.
So their economy's done then.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
means no one's going to work. It's over.
yeah.
It's
At least for
holy
now.
shit.
Um,
Holy shit.
I mean, this is such a pivotal moment, in so many ways. You're obviously seeing, you know, we talk about the Cold War, right? And we talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis and all that. Like, I don't think we're that far off another, moment like that with something like this as well, because the talk of
Please
nukes, like,
don't let that happen while Biden's president. Oh my god. Don't
I
say that,
know,
Patter.
I
Don't
know, I'm
say
telling
that.
you. And I think
Oh god.
something like, because NATO were formed, right? NATO have never actually been, let loose, right?
They've never been pressed to need to.
Yeah, but that's what I'm
No,
saying.
no one's been dumb enough.
Right, but I mean, what will it take for them to do that, and will that be enough then for that sort of war to happen? Which nobody wants to see. There's no winners from that, right? Nukes, I think, at the brunt of it, are a deterrent, right?
Mhm.
And I think, the reason that a lot of people were scared of someone like Kim Jong Un is, he's mad enough to just drop a nuke, right?
Not a
Because
rational actor, yeah.
yeah, and economically, it doesn't really matter to him, right? But
Mhm.
we know that Russians and Putin and the leaders over there, they care about that bottom line, and they care about progressing after that. So
And they have to at least keep half the people on their side because,
yeah,
like, people forget, like, Russia has revolution in its blood.
right,
A lot of
exactly,
it. So that's not
exactly.
like a foregone. He ain't no Kim Jong Un.
No,
Everyone's not sipping the Kool-Aid or afraid of that man. There's teenagers in the street right now.
right, yeah. It was crazy. I was just, on a side note, I was reading about how many tech companies are in the Ukraine, like,
Mhm.
and like even the founding of tech companies, like WhatsApp. I guess one of the original founders of that was from the Ukraine, Odessa,
Mm.
the area of Odessa. There's a ton of, like, one of the photo systems I use, Skylum. Their tech support is down right now. One of the reasons is it's based in Odessa. Everybody who's
It's
manning
all
the fort there.
evacuated. Yeah.
I felt like being a dickhead today and be like, what's going on over here? This, but I knew what they were dealing with.
Send a Kermit the Frog email.
Yeah, that's something that I saw brought up by another person. I was reading online about how we've seen occupations in the past. You look to what happens in the Middle East, and you obviously, I'm not going to compare and contrast. War is war, and it's terrible across the board. But one of the things that, for a country like Ukraine, it's not a third world country. You have a rich art, music, tech scene. It's a democracy. It's essentially one of the biggest in Europe. What some of the analysis someone said was that you know it's kind of looked upon differently as what happened in the Middle East, but at the same time, this sort of stuff has happened before, but not to this scale, and not
Mhm.
with this sort of repercussions potentially beyond that. Because you look to the ties of both Ukraine and Russia, economically, Russia is obviously going to turn to someone like China, um, and then beyond that, it's really interesting about the UAE and how they're gonna kind of positioning
Yeah, that's
themselves.
I mean, honestly, I think that's just, again, Mohammed bin Solomon being like, "Hey, United States, you wanna come shake my hand and legitimize me now?" That's honestly what I think he's pushing. Like, I don't think he
Is
wants
MBS is
any
Saudi
part.
Arabia though, right?
What's that?
MBS is Saudi Arabia, right?
Yeah, yeah, but he's a part of that is what I'm saying. Like, he has proxies at play. That's my
You
point.
okay, gotcha,
Yeah,
gotcha.
yeah, that's my point. That whole
Right,
he's one of the commanding partners in OPEC. And
right,
because
yeah,
and everyone forgets Russia's in OPEC now. Like
yeah,
there's a lot of really weird realignment happening that doesn't see it, like, it seems like it's gonna sift out in a super unpredictable way.
right,
Like Iran just signed a crazy economic deal with China a year ago. Like there's so much reshuffling of the deck happening right now. And I honestly,
Mhm.
I think that like this is like the biggest piece that my analysis keeps coming back to with like trying to get in Putin's head, which is I know is impossible, but like he sees the weakness. Like he just saw every dictator on the world stage just saw how weak and ineffectual the United States was dealing with the pandemic. They
Mhm.
just saw how weak and ineffectual the United States was having a threat to its own democracy.
Yep.
They see this shit. They see the divisions and they understand, oh, this is the perfect time. On top of the fact that Ukraine has their own TV show president right now.
Mhm.
We just had ours. They have
Yeah.
theirs now.
Yeah.
When would the metal ever be this hot to
Yeah.
strike ever again?
And you
Like
bring up a good point.
ever again.
You bring up a good point, and you know, Russia is playing the long game, and Putin has been playing the long game for quite some time. You know, the destabilization of Europe around things like Brexit, and then obviously the
Mhm.
US elections, whether you want to believe that, you know, they were directly or indirectly involved with causing chaos in that. Obviously, you know, Russian bots and trolls played a part in that, and in bringing that discourse to the point now where, you know, you have people on the other side, people in the US, you know, praising Putin and almost, you know, saying he's right and trying to blame everything, you know, the reason that this is happening on, you know, Joe Biden and the Democrats. Now, as incompetent as he could be, you know, Putin is playing this, you know, a while. This is not something that just popped up.
Right.
And you know, you brought up a good point as well when you look at, you know, the OPEC and whatnot. One of the reasons that Russia got involved in Syria and northern Syria and why they're so tight with Assad there is they saw the strategical, you know, importance of the northern pipeline in Syria as well, which then it plays into that. And you know, energy is going to play an important part in all of this as well. And you know, Russia, I think, supplies something like 30% of all the energy to Germany, in around that number.
Yep.
Um, so there's going to be
It's
crises coming out.
fluctuated, but the main point is it's not so much how much they give them, at least from I did a ton of digging in the research I was trying to do for this one I was going to do before. It's
Yeah,
the fact that Germany and a lot of European countries right now are operating at a deficit. Like
right.
they're not energy neutral for what they have on hand for what their predicted needs are.
Yeah,
And like winter's not over yet.
winter
like
is coming.
yeah, they're at like a negative 15% deficit, Germany is. So like again, I think that just like the circumstances presented themselves in such a way that like Putin being the chess player I think he is was like, fuck, I'm never gonna get a window like this again.
Yeah,
I'm never gonna get it again. It's
yeah,
like and like you said, he's a student of history. He has a lot of the historical angst that a lot of 21st century USSR romanticizing Russians have
yeah,
around the West and NATO. And like honestly, it's there couldn't have been presented a better window of the last 5 years to culminate to this for him
mhm,
with Trump, like you said, Brexit, this pandemic. Like there's so China's meteoric fucking rise. Like it really just it fell into his lap, and it really isn't that surprising because like you said, Russia playing the long game. Like even when it was the USSR, the Cold War, like that was always kind of their tact. It wasn't,
yeah,
the United States and many Western countries are famous for, big brash decisions and the sort of the element of surprise with that. That's never been Russia's game. That's never been Russia's game. It's always been operate within action for so long to the point where it drives like NatSec people in like the United States crazy because for another point, like he put them to sleep, all these NatSec people. Every spring, Russia does exercises on the Ukrainian border like this, massing troops, doing
mhm,
exercises with Belarus. They
mhm,
do this, they've done this every year for like 5 years. That's
yeah,
why a ton of people were skeptical. And we're like,
yeah.
"Oh, there's fucking do this shit every year." It
I
wasn't
mean,
130 wasn't
I was one of them.
130,000, but
I was one of them. I was like, okay, they're just kind of showing what they could potentially do and what they
right,
have. They're showing off. They're,
right.
you know, flexing in the mirror type thing. But um, now, correct me if I'm wrong, but before Zelensky, wasn't there uh, Ukrainian prime minister or leader there who was kind of a puppet, wasn't he? Like kind of a Putin plant. Is that right?
Yeah. And then he got cooed in 2014.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, like I said, 2014 was a pivotal point for all this,
Right.
which kind of led then to the point where he just wants. I don't think it's an occupation. I think he wants a regime change. He wants to put that same sort of fella in there, and then look at the landscape. And he's gained Crimea, Donetsk, or basically the Donbass as well. And he's been able to do all this in his ideal scenario, do all this and have not NATO not, get new members, i.e. Ukraine, Finland, whatever, and really call their bluff. I don't think that at the end of all this, if what I just said there is what it's going to be, I don't think that Putin is going to advance anymore. I think he's going to sit there as someone who thinks he's achieved so much for Russia, but at the end of the day, all he's done is really destabilize a country that was just trying to live without Russia for once,
Right. I mean, and that's the thing. Like, I've seen a ton of like insane fucking like foaming at the mouth on CNN, MSNBC, of people being like, "Oh, anyone who thinks Putin's gonna stop at Ukraine is crazy." And it's like, what? His mouth, he's choking on Ukraine already.
Yeah.
Politically, maybe not militarily, like, because again, we both agree, like, he could commit so much more resources if he wanted to go all out, and he's not. But it's too big of a chew. Like, this guy, what the fuck are you people talking? Do you know how long it would take to actually pacify Ukraine? If he actually did that, it would take, like, Biden, for example, just today was like, oh, they could take Ukraine quickly. Listen, all these fucking eggheads who do all this analysis that give him his intelligence briefings and shit. Anyone forget about Afghanistan? Remember how many like late last year, or I'm sorry, it was like last summer, where people were giving him varying accounts of what their assumptions would be of how long it would take for Afghanistan to follow the Taliban.
Yeah.
People were like, oh, 6 months to a year. Some people were saying like, oh, this and that. But again, they don't take into account what the nature of like what facts on the ground are. Like in Afghanistan, that shit happened in the blink of a fucking eye because the Taliban had already greased the right palms. They'd already threatened or coerced or bribed the correct people to just roll through. Like it wasn't a problem. Okay, Putin is the master of that.
Right.
So in my opinion, I think it's going to be a lightning strike attack. I don't think he needs to take Kiev. I think it's just going to be a matter of crippling the economy, which he already did definitionally by the invasion, because just like you said, a ton of the Ukrainian economy is the fact that the tolls essentially that they make off of gas and liquid propane and oil traveling through their country to Western countries from Russia. So that immediately got cut off. Which, not to mention, Ukraine wasn't paying a lot of the fees that they owed Russia for that across the last few years. It's part of the justification that Putin suggested, for just like to throw a little cherry on top. But all, like you said, all the companies, Western companies that are cited in Ukraine, all that shit is done now, son. Like, you got a hot war, that economy is exploded. It's gone. So like, just him doing what he did Wednesday morning or Wednesday night, that right there pretty much took that step right there. Blink of an eye. Boom. That shit is gone. Ukraine's economy's fucked for years now. Because Western investment won't come back for a long time. And that's what Ukraine was completely reliant upon. It's been built up in that fashion for, the last decade. So now that
I wonder though, if because of, what Russia has done is so abhorrent, I wonder if there'll be a concerted push to put industry back in there,
like a Marshall Plan for Ukraine?
Perhaps. Well, not so many words, but I wonder if there will be some sort of at least humanitarian push.
Well, yeah, but I'm saying like an actual reconstruction of the economy and like making room for commerce to come back. That ain't gonna happen unless Putin's gone.
Yeah. Well, I guess it all depends on how everything shakes up at the end of this, whenever that would be.
Right.
And we're only at the start of it, I believe. I guess they want to sit down. Did you read about that? The Russians do want to sit down with the Ukrainians
in Belarus.
Is it in Belarus?
Yeah, that's what they said. They were like, let's meet in Belarus.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Yeah. No one's doing that.
In the back of my mind, I keep, kind of comparing it to World War II right now, just because it's, there's war in Europe again, essentially. But I kind of feel like Russia, China, Syria, I won't even count like Belarus, but like perhaps UAE are kind of forming that new axis of evil type thing. Well, NATO is the allies. Just the way
But
I'm
it's an
kind of,
economic axis of evil.
yeah,
That's what actually makes
exactly.
it
I mean,
scary
that's what
for
it's
the
all
West.
about anyway. That's what it's all about. Fuck the whole like these. They
Yeah.
want to be Russian. We want to have our Russian people back. It's not about that.
America don't have enough fucking oil and gas to supply Europe. That's the end of the game,
Yep.
right there. All it would take is for them to be like, okay, we're cutting it all off, buckos. Because at the end of the day, again, I feel like people forget China's a mastery of currency manipulation. They have their own like a de facto central bank. We've been sanctioning them to the not to the hill. I won't say that, but like it's because we can't, because we have a symbiotic economic relationship with them. But America's been trying to figure out all the ways that they can do shit to China. They've been talking about it for a decade. There's nothing you can do. There is nothing. I've been saying this since we've started this show, because people still talk about, like, the Republicans nonstop. Oh, China's an enemy. China's an enemy. China's an enemy. And it's like, well,
what are you going to do? They're also the biggest friend you have.
Yeah, but they're also it's like they're not even like, they talk about them like they're our economic relationship with us as if like they're parasitic. It's like, no, we're twins. We're attached twins. That's what we are. If someone gets cut off, the other fucking dies.
Yeah,
Okay?
exactly.
Like someone's dying.
I think this is a good point as well to kind of talk about. There's been sanctions or whatever, and what the sanctions are. But one of the ones that's been thrown around a lot is the SWIFT, kicking Russia out of SWIFT, the banking system. And the most significant country that's been kicked out of it obviously is Iran.
Yeah.
But Russia is far bigger than that. So some of the apprehension around that, maybe you can speak to that, because I know I'd mentioned it to you, but the sheer size of Russia would, with them getting kicked out of that, would tank a lot, right?
Right. So the analysis that I've seen on Swift, I've seen some like, obviously it's all over TV. Like there's a million people, almost every US senator on Twitter was saying, we need to cut off Swift now. We need to cut off Swift now. I heard some people analyzing this weeks ago when I was doing my research. And if you really dig into it, it keeps tying back to the economic dependency of or synchronization and as far as fossil fuels go with Europe and the rest of Europe and Russia, you will set off a domino. Like, so Russia overnight, like we said, had their stock market slashed in half, basically value wise. And that's not something that's going to bounce back the way that the American stock market does. The American stock market can fucking take like a 20-point goddamn hit and be fine next month. That ain't gonna happen in Russia. But the difference here is you cut Russia off of SWIFT. Again, it's no different than if you roll NATO troops in, where Putin no longer can be considered a rational actor. If you roll in NATO troops, maybe he threatens nukes. Maybe he uses tactical nukes. Maybe he does more wild shit. Maybe he starts, declares total war on Ukraine or anyone. Like, who knows? You cut him off of SWIFT, he might turn the gas pipe off. Because if he's to the point where he doesn't give a fuck about what his people think or their pocket or if they have food, do you really want to test that man? That's my question. So there's that part of it, the Putin analysis. Then you get to the global economic system, which we all understand, like how it's all just a bunch of tentacles all wrapped around one another, not to use like the fucking like anti-Semitic trope there, but it literally is like, they're all connected. It's like the Pokemon Tangela. Like there's like just like a bunch of cords all wrapped around each other. And if you start pulling at those, like it fucks up the cohesion. There's all the people who were like just saying so nonchalantly, like, oh, cut off SWIFT. No one can even predict what the fuck would happen out of that. So first of all, that's where France and Germany's hesitation came out of, even just Nord Stream, let alone SWIFT. Like they're totally against that. They are
Yeah.
they've adamantly been saying that. Biden literally tried to get the German the new German
Chancellor.
chancellor to like on live TV like talk about Swift, and he just ducked it. Like he was just like and didn't say Swift at all.
That's funny.
So, you know, and that would be honestly like that would be the most severe sanction you could do. I know there's been a lot of coverage today talking about, oh, why didn't you go after Putin's personal assets? And you know,
Well,
there's
they
no
did, I
legal
think now,
people.
right? That was one of the latest
Yeah.
sanctions is him
But like
and
you said, with money laundering and how much shit
exactly,
he
yeah.
probably has parked, what are you really doing?
Well,
Swift
something
would be the biggest thing you could do, and it's just
something I read in the Economist regarding this. You know, we've alluded to already. You know, Russia is the 5th largest trading partner of the EU. It's the source of 35% of Europe's gas supply, and it's home to, you know, 350 billion of EU assets, right? Number one. So cutting off SWIFT would make it harder for, you know, international buyers to pay for energy supplies. And
your own companies, your own multinationals.
yeah, and
That
you alluded to it as well that, you know, Russia would see that as an act of war, in not too many words, and there surely would be retaliation with that. And then lastly, using SWIFT as a weapon against Russia, you know, that'll hurt American interests, no doubt. We know that America holds, you know, sway over finances with the dollar's dominance.
yeah.
But China, they also have their own kind of SWIFT banking system. I was reading. The volume of transactions on that is about 50 billion, but that's well behind, you know, 400 billion that, you know, SWIFT does a year. So again, that's another thing that's going to play into it. But I don't think it's something that with sanctions, obviously people are saying you should sanction everything. But if that's the only weapon you're using, if you're going to use all of it, then you have nothing really left to use, right? So
Right.
I'm not a proponent of, you know, just throwing all the sanctions out there if that's going to be the only weapon, you know, you have right now. So
Right. And not to mention, I feel like again, it's sanitized language. When they speak about this in the media, a lot of people don't have the full understanding that if you cut off SWIFT and do those types of sanctions, that will not all you're trying to put pressure on Putin by starving his people.
yeah,
That's all you're doing. You're gonna
yeah.
fuck with regular people. Regular people are going to have nothing. That means their assets will be frozen. People who have small businesses. What was the other interesting thing I learned in some of my research was the company Siemens. My father-in-law used to work for them. Giant
Yep.
company.
Yep.
They
My
actually
first cell phone was a Siemens.
yeah, they're a multinational. They actually the bulk of their profits come from Russia. Their arm in Russia. So you're talking about companies that people perceive as Western countries
Yeah.
that actually make a ton of money in the East. There would be such a wild cascading effect. I honestly think it's an empty threat. I don't think that any like for example, like that has to go through UN resolution. That's not something that the United States can do unilaterally, first of
Right.
all.
Yeah.
So I don't see that happening. And again, like the actual impact of what those types of sanctions do. And this is I actually wanted to hit this point too because I heard someone say this and it like shocked my brain back into like, wow, why wasn't I thinking this way? Notice how we're doing and again, it wasn't just me doing it. Like I'm listening to other people's analysis and trying to like, you know, put it through my own process and everything. But if you notice how differently and how much trepidation there is around like ooh should we sanction like
Yeah.
there is no question right now in
Mhm.
anyone who's delivering analysis whether it be in mainstream media or independent media that what Putin's doing right now is one of the wildest things that's happened like wildest military actions that's happened since World War II.
Mhm.
But we unquestioningly as a people in this country and in the West at large don't even bat a fucking eye when we've been sanctioning Middle Eastern countries and
Yeah.
starving those people. Yemen is literally going
Mhm.
through a famine right now.
Yep.
We've sanctioned them to the hilt. Iran, we've sanctioned to the hilt. Okay, we've done nothing but take out the worst consequences on regular normal people who live in those countries because of what their leaders have done. But look at even how wild Russia is acting on the world stage in the UN.
Mhm.
And we're like, ooh. Now, is it because of economic reasons? or is there a little bit of racism at play here? I don't
Yeah.
know. I
Yeah.
honestly think there kind of is,
Yeah.
because even as much as people have beat the drum and been like, oh, Russia's, all the cold warriors and shit in the West, in America that made entire political careers off of that, even they still like have to think like on a realistic level, like, well, we were like, Russia did like help us beat Hitler. You know what I mean? Like,
They started off with them though.
sure, for sure, for sure. But I'm just saying, like,
Yeah, yeah, I know.
anyone
Yeah.
anyone who's gonna like have some sort of a realistic analysis on World War II, like Russia sacrificed the most in that war.
They always do.
Yeah, I mean, definitionally, yeah.
Yeah, they
But
always do. They're always the most casualties.
but I just, I would encourage people to like actually look into what the effect of wide sweeping sanctions like that actually have on a people when you cut off a country from, a perfect example, like in Afghanistan right now. Biden froze a ton of Afghanistan's central banking assets to try to starve the Taliban of money. But the Taliban needs that money to administer a government
Right.
to
And
the
that's
people.
yeah,
Like, that's what would happen. And, and,
yeah.
and they do this to encourage revolution within the country or an overthrow of the government. But again, I don't know, man. I
Yeah.
feel like there's a lot of, again, there's a lot of nationalism and stuff tied up in a lot of this that I feel like, people a lot, especially Americans, because we're such a young country and our nationalism for the most part is tied up in World War II romanticism.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
it's a whole nother ballgame in the East, man. Like,
Yeah. And it's funny you say that. I was just reading there some of the other countries that didn't condemn Russia's actions at that US or at the UN vote. I think it was Cuba, Venezuela, and another country. And they blamed, the US, UK, and the EU for what's happening right now, but they didn't obviously back what Russia is doing.
right.
If you're to really look back on, where we're at right now, there is, like you've mentioned, there's some onus on the EU and the US to kind of look at themselves. When we talk about what happened in the Middle East and kind of how Russia played a part in northern Syria, beating back quote unquote terrorists and whatnot. There is a kind of a connection or a straight line between him feeling emboldened enough to be able to do something like this and those partners not being strong enough in vital moments, i.e. 2014, and then obviously what's happening, like you mentioned, with the insurrection, how weak they were, how weak the US were in the pandemic. Everything just kind of aligned for him to do this. And we've mentioned that it's obviously a fluid situation right now. There could be far more things to talk about tomorrow because obviously the capital is under siege at the moment. So I think we should probably do something midweek if you're up for it. But
Yeah, oh hell yeah. And I want to make one more point to just sort of dovetail off of what you were saying there is I again, like I encourage people so much because we can't do it because it's such a time suck. But like really look into the history of the Cold War, understand what happened and what led to the dissolution of the USSR, and try to gain an understanding here because a lot of these countries you see on the ouster, like Cuba, Venezuela, like a lot of those countries you just named, a lot of the countries that are aligning themselves with Russia as sort of natural allies against NATO. This isn't me saying like, oh, it's NATO's fault, it's America's fault. I'm not gonna go like, full like, oh, this is just. I'm not gonna take a singular course of historical analysis and be like, this is exactly what led us to here. No, I'm not. I'm not gonna say that at all. That's crazy talk. But what I will say is, people have to try to. This is why I think economic analysis in politics is so important because it sort of gives you a different taste, a different angle at viewing these things, how they play out over time in a historical context. Because every country you just named, including Russia, including China, and many others that we haven't named, have been put on the outs by NATO or made enemies by NATO and are natural enemies of America because they did not embrace liberal democracy and hyper capitalism in the way in American hegemony. That is simply it. That is simply it. The the USSR in its youth was simply just trying to, have self-determination in a different economic system. And again, this isn't me excusing anything Putin's doing right
Yeah.
now. Let's keep
Yeah.
that in context. But Venezuela, Cuba is the biggest example of that. And Cuba is probably the only country in modernity right now that has successfully won that fight. Denied American hegemony and said, no, we're going to go our own course and we're not going to allow you to, dictate the way that we operate within our own sovereignty. And that honestly is why you're seeing these natural lines of division. That's where that shit comes from. So I encourage people to like go in and dive in and learn a little more about that, because that shit is all at play here. Because I'll tell you right now, the Cuban people have gone through a lot in the last 40 years, a lot of turmoil, a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, and most of it just in the name of defiance of wanting to have self-determination.
Yeah.
So as much as you hear right now on your TV, if you turn it on, a lot of folks in the West decrying Russia for what it's doing today, which again, I agree. They are denying Ukraine determination. These are all countries who did this shit through colonialism and neocolonialism still today. Like they're doing it right now.
Exactly.
They're just not doing it. They're just not rolling a tank into Libya. Or not Libya, I should say Somalia. Like we just airstruck Somalia right now. They're having a civil war, and we're just like indiscriminately bombing shit.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying, like
I'm just saying,
like we got to keep it super real here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you on that. And I think something you said earlier, is a good. This is a shuffling of the deck. This is a big shuffling of the deck here. And no matter what happens over the next few days, you're going to, off the back of, a global pandemic, off the back of, an economic, crisis around that, you're going to, there'll be, not to be as dramatic, but there'll be a new world order at the end of all this, or at least some new major players, or, some stronger major players. But yeah, this was fun.
I think like singular or duopolistic hegemony is coming to an end. Like we're getting back to, just like you said, like this is like we're reshuffling the deck back to like World War I divisions, where it's like you're gonna have multiple alliances. And if it gets big enough, you might get 1v1. But right now, like there is a ton of people sitting out. There's a ton of people that are like just de facto like, yeah, I don't like America anymore. Like it's super interesting, man. But we definitely got to hop back on at some point, and because this isn't going to stop. So super interesting.
I wish the Ukrainian people well. I know there's been a ton of opportunities for for people all over the world. You can donate. I know there's been a ton of things pop up. So if that's something that you guys want to do, there's definitely opportunities for that there. I won't say keep them in your thoughts and prayers, because I hate that fucking term. But
do your due diligence before you send money anywhere, because there's a wild amount of scams right now.
For sure,
for sending money to Ukraine.
And
also due diligence on like seeing news coming out of there, because there's so much fake news.
I saw that Anonymous hacked the Russian government. Did you see that? Anonymous are against them on this.
I thought they like rounded them all up. They're still
they're Anonymous are still on the loose, whoever they are.
I feel like it's a psyop at this point, bro. I don't even know. Probably. It's been too long. There's no way they haven't found these motherfuckers. All of them. There's no way.
Yeah.
But then again, Snowden's like just chilling now.
Yeah. All right. Well, this was fun. Like I said, it's something that's fluid going on. So we definitely should hop back on it or something. We'll be in communication anyway about what's going on. But I better get back to some daddy duties. Appreciate everyone listening. Definitely want to hop on back on this and chat some more. I've been kind of on a hiatus, but Ramon has steered the ship well.
I haven't done much. I started a new job. It's just been rough, but I definitely want to start. I've got my ground now. I want to start getting back into things here. So,
all right, brother. Have a good night.
Take it easy. Later, folks.